Hello! Welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to begin talking about the ongoing WildC.A.T.S series with WildC.A.T.S number 5. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in November of 1993, as I stated before, this is the beginning of the ongoing series, even though it is issue number 5, and that is because Jim Lee decided to continue the numbering from the miniseries into the ongoing series rather than start it back over at 1, which wasn't the worst idea, but I do feel like it's still a little bit confusing given that he released issue number 0 between the miniseries and ongoing series. Also, we can see here on the cover that while it is very detailed, in my opinion, it's also really busy. To try and squeeze the 6 primary team members of WildC.A.T.S onto the cover in not even the back or the foreground, in the middle ground, because we can see here there's a destroyed android lying in the foreground with the team in the middle ground and then an explosion in the background. It looks cool and all. It's just, to me, it's almost just a little bit confusing and weird to look at. I feel like maybe Jim would have been better off going with just focusing on 1 or 2 of the characters on the cover instead of all of these 6. And keep in mind, he left out Void and Marlowe, so it's not even the full team, but still, with 6 individual characters, especially with Maul being so gigantic, it's kind of weird to try and fit them all onto one cover in a sequence like this, and to not even put them in the foreground on top of that. Jim Lee, Brandon Choi, co-creators. Brandon Choi, Jim Lee, story. Jim Lee, pencils. Scott Williams, inks. Joe Chiodo, colors. Ben Fernandez and Joe Dunn, color separators. Chris Eliopoulos, letters. Deborah Marvin, editor. Now, we can see here that the first page is actually a 2-page fold-out splash, which is awesome and is a really cool little, like, I don't want to say gimmick, because I think that this is actually really neat. I would definitely describe it more so as a feature that we're going to see continued multiple times throughout this book. We see here that Zealot and Grifter are riding some sort of high-tech hang glider towards a base on the side of a cliff at the top of a mountain, and Grifter is actually complaining a little bit about the fact that the 2 of them have been sent in ahead of the rest of the team to infiltrate this base. And Zealot reminds him that it was actually his idea because it was his contact they used to get the information about this base and the codes that they were going to need to open up a vault which contains some very sensitive materials that they need to get their hands on. As they approach the base, they are surprised when they come across a squad of guards that are on patrol, and Grifter is a little bit tentative about what they need to do, but then decides to just go headlong into it and dives in, shooting all of the glass out, guns blazing, full frontal assault. And, Zealot was like, hey, we can try and come up with another plan, but Grifter's like, nope, this is the way it's got to be. And she's actually kind of irritated by the fact that he's so headstrong and just trying to go in guns blazing with no kind of second thoughts about their safety or how they need to approach this as cautiously as possible. We then get to this quadruple page fold out splash, which is sick. Look how awesome all of this is. There's nothing bad about this other than the fact that I had to zoom out to get it all in frame, and I have to zoom back in to actually start talking about the storyline, which we do right now. And we can see that Zealot and Grifter catch the 2 Gamoran hunter killers by surprise, taking them out immediately. And Zealot is confused by them altogether. She has no idea what they are. Grifter, however, has come into contact with the Gamorans before and explains exactly what they are, and that Kaizen Gamora creates and sells these to dictators and despots all around the world. And this is why it's so important for them to stop this from going any further than it already has. Because if the Demonites are able to get their hands on this technology and replicate it, no longer will they have to inhabit and possess human bodies, they'll instead be able to just build their own biosynthetic warrior bodies that they can use at any time they choose, which will have all sorts of cybernetic implants and upgrades, making them almost unstoppable in terms of their ability to take over the world. So this is really one of those worst case scenarios that the Wildcats have got to stop in its tracks to make sure that the Demonites do not conquer the Earth. As the two of them land safely, then Zealot points out that two of the other Gamorreans are getting away. Grifter states that it's not a problem, he'll handle it, as he quickly pulls one of his pistols up behind his back and shoots one of the fleeing Gamorreans. However, Zealot immediately chastises him and tells him to quit showboating as she pulls two of her boomerang blade things from her costume that we don't exactly know what they're called, and launches them at the other Gamorrean, taking him out immediately. At this point, we find out too that it was actually none other than Zealot who convinced Grifter to leave Team 7 and join her in her quest to defeat the Demonites and prevent them from conquering the planet. As they move deeper into the facility, they come up against a wall, and Zealot asks Grifter if he knows exactly where he's going. He states he does, and that if there was anyone getting close to them or coming up on them from behind, he'd be able to sense it. And this would be true if they were dealing with living beings. Unfortunately, as they turn the corner, they find out that there is a large contingency of androids that are hunting them down. These are non-living entities, therefore Grifter's powers that he gained during the Genesis project do not actually work on them, and he didn't sense them approaching, which he clearly states to Zealot as the two of them begin to flee, and she once again starts to give him crap about being overconfident. Now, if you haven't watched any of my videos about Team 7, I suggest you do, as that gives some pretty important backstory information into Grifter and the super abilities that he does possess that he gained from exposure to the Genesis particles, and also why he is currently in 1993 in his mid to late 40s, but still looks like he hasn't aged a day. That's kind of explained in it as well. So definitely check those out if you want more backstory into Grifter and his origins. As the two continue to flee, they eventually reach a set of security doors which start to close. At this point, Zealot tells Grifter to go on without her and that she will hold off the androids which are pursuing them. Grifter doesn't like this plan, but also realizes that Zealot is correct and that securing the contents of the vault are of the utmost importance. So he decides to go ahead and follow her direction and leaps through the doors just as they close. Unfortunately, this set of doors led directly into a hallway filled with sentry guns, which immediately opened fire upon him. Now, thankfully for Grifter, he also has superhuman agility, another ability that he gained from exposure to the Genesis particles, and he uses it to dodge all of the fire, and also pull out a few hand grenades, which he throws back behind him to destroy all of the sentry guns. Eventually, he reaches the vault and uses an access code that he was given by someone named Cyberjack, who we have yet to be introduced to, and the codes immediately open the vault. And at this point, Grifter is actually rather surprised at how complete all of the technology within the vault is, and then also realizes that this is not the technology that is used to produce hunter-killers, but is instead the exact same type of technology that was used to produce none other than Spartan, the team leader of the Wildcats. And this is something he finds very shocking, as Marlowe told both he and Zealot that when he first got Spartan's body from the Gamorreans, that he destroyed all of the technology that was used to create him so that they could not produce a basically endless army of near unstoppable mechanical soldiers to sell to all sorts of evil people around the world. So Grifter decides to call in for backup as he realizes that things are going to start getting out of hand if this is what they're in store for. However, he does not realize that he's being approached from behind by none other than the human who was possessed by the demonite that is in charge of securing and rebuilding all of this technology to use for the demonites so that they can produce this unstoppable army. Grifter turns and immediately opens fire on Dr. Heinrich Richthofen, who is a human that used to at one time be the head of research and development at Cyberdata. However, now that he has been possessed by one of the demonites, all of his knowledge is being used to try and produce an unstoppable army for the demonites to use to conquer Earth. Grifter is then shocked when Dr. Richthofen brings up a force field and blocks all of the fire from his pistols, as none of the information they had on him ever stated that he had any type of superhuman powers. He's then once again surprised when none other than Misery shows up behind him, as he even thinks to himself that neither one of them are putting off any type of life signals that his powers could have detected. He immediately starts to dismiss Misery, thinking that she's no real threat. However, this is a miscalculation on his part when she does attack and levels him with a kick to the jaw. Richthofen then states that he wants Misery to kill Grifter so that they can then go after Zealot and use their DNA to enhance the machine army that they're trying to build for the demonites. Of course, Grifter has no intention of failing in his mission or going down that easy, as he immediately counterattacks Misery with his own kick to the face. Misery then decides to use her psychic powers to attack Grifter. However, as we saw in the Team 7 miniseries, Grifter's powers do allow him to defend against psychic attacks. Unfortunately, it takes most of his concentration to do this, which leaves him wide open for an attack from behind from none other than Richthofen himself. Grifter is immediately knocked to the floor by the force of the blast as he starts to realize that he's being overwhelmed here, but he's not ready to give up hope just yet, as he even has a little bit of witty banter stating, "Hey, watch the face, honey." However, Misery has no intention of letting up, as she immediately jumps on him from behind and smashes his face into the ground, stating that maybe if she can soften up his skull, she'll be able to use her powers against him and potentially even use him as a lure to get Zealot to come to their location. At this point, she starts to feel like she has the upper hand, believing that because he's not giving her any witty banter that he's down for the count. However, what she doesn't realize is that Grifter is actually just stalling, trying to give the rest of the team time to teleport in, which seems like it's about to work, as we see in the bottom panel that a familiar pink aura is starting to form in the room behind Misery and Richthofen as they discuss their next move. We then get an advertisement for Rival coming to the Image universe in 1994, and I gotta be honest, I do not remember this character at all. I have no issues of Rival. I'm positive. I don't even have to look through my collection to know that I do not have a single issue of this book, nor do I remember anything about this character, which, I gotta be real with you, is actually kind of infuriating to me, as I really try to know as much as I can about all of these early Image books and the different characters that were in the early Image universe. And to find one that I know nothing about is really disappointing in a lot of ways. We then get a 2-page vertical splash advertisement for the Killer Instinct miniseries, which, by the way, this issue is actually a prologue for, as we see that this miniseries will feature both Ripclaw, Warblade, and the evil mutant cyborg that we've only encountered a little bit up until this point in Misery. Now, if none of this seems to make a whole lot of sense in terms of why exactly the three of them are going to be featured so heavily in this miniseries, just keep watching, because a lot of that story is going to be built from this issue. Richthofen is then stunned when the rest of the WildC.A.T.S team suddenly appears in front of him, as he was not expecting to be interrupted in what he believed was his moment of triumph. As the team appears, Voodoo asks Grifter if he's okay. He says he's fine, and Spartan immediately tells all of the rest of the team exactly what they need to do and wastes no time in jumping into action. At this point, Voodoo uses her powers to exorcise the demonite from Dr. Richtofen, which is a good thing in the sense that it frees Dr. Richtofen from the influence of the demonites and also gives them the ability to take out the demonite without killing Richtofen. However, when Voodoo uses these powers of hers, it leaves her completely drained and basically defenseless as the demonite lunges towards her to try and take her out. Thankfully, Spartan is nearby and immediately jumps in front of the demonite and unleashes a bioblast that shoots a hole directly through the demonite's torso, killing it instantly. We then see that Misery is confronted by none other than Maul, who states, "You hurt my friend Grifter, and now I'm going to hurt you." Misery believes that she can then use Maul against the rest of the Wildcats team as she plans to take over his mind using her psychic abilities as she jumps over his attack. However, she is then shocked when she realizes that her powers won't really work on Maul because, as she states, there's nothing up there for her to work with. Now, this is in reference to the way that Maul's powers work. He is basically kind of like an Incredible Hulk analog in the Image universe. However, the difference between him and the Hulk is that Maul can control how strong he gets by simply getting bigger. Unfortunately, the bigger and stronger he gets, the more mindless he becomes. Therefore, as his power increases, his intelligence goes down, which is why Misery's powers aren't really that useful against him, as he's sacrificed a lot of his cognitive abilities to gain physical abilities in this instance. As he looks through the hole that he punched through the wall, he's surprised to see none other than Zealot. He asks if she needs any help. However, she states that she's fine, but they do need to get going as the droids have alerted the local authorities. We then see that Misery lands on her feet, but is immediately confronted by Warblade, who she also recognizes and states, "Long time no see, Reno." Now, Reno is Warblade's actual name, and this is in reference to the fact that Warblade used to be part of Cyberdata, which is where he got his transforming claw hands from. This is something that we got a bit of a glimpse of with the Cyberforce number 0 issue. If you want to check that out, you can go back and watch my video on that. But we also know that Misery used her mind control abilities on him a lot, and that for a long time, Warblade believed that he was absolutely in love with Misery, but came to realize that this was just her using her powers to control him, and then she would also put him in spots of mortal danger by taking away his ability to use his powers or move when he was in a fight, and that this almost cost him his life on a few occasions, which of course led to him eventually despising her, and now he's out for revenge. He immediately lunges at Misery, but she dodges the attack. Mostly, we see that he does land a few cuts and that there's a little bit of blood involved, but she's able to keep her wits about her and is more than a match physically for Warblade, despite the fact that he has these razor-sharp claw hands. Zealot then climbs through the hole that Maul created in the wall and joins up with the rest of the team, stating that they need to get out of here now. Grifter then asks Spartan if he's made any headway on gathering the data that they came here to retrieve, and Spartan states that the security protocols in the system are actually far more advanced than he believed they would be, and on top of that, they're also linked to a self-destruct sequence that, if he triggers, will cause the entire facility to explode. He manages to bypass all the security and then realizes that the amount of data in this system is actually rather mind-boggling, and states that he doesn't have enough time to analyze it in the current situation. So he instead decides to download all of it onto his own hard drive, and he does so by plugging a wire directly into his eyeball, which seems like a really odd spot for a data port, you know? However, it does admittedly look super cool in a comic book context. After downloading the data, Spartan is rather shocked to realize that Dr. Richtofen not only was able to get his hands on all of the data necessary to create more beings just like Spartan, but he was also able to replicate all of the technology and actually create a functioning prototype. Upon realizing all of this, Spartan decides that the best course of action is to actually trigger the self-destruct sequence to destroy the lab and all of the technology and data within it to prevent it from falling into the hands of the Demonites. Grifter is not a fan of this plan whatsoever. Unfortunately, Spartan has already triggered it by the time he protests, and a explosion immediately begins, and all of the team is forced to try and retreat back to the rendezvous point so that Void can teleport all of them out of the facility so that they're not instantly killed. We then get an advertisement for Jim Lee's Sky Caps, which, as I've stated before in other videos when coming across this ad, these are just Pogs, and Jim Lee did not want to have to pay Pogs a licensing fee, so he just called them something different, which apparently was enough to keep him out of legal hot water, even though they're exactly the same thing. I'm guessing, I don't recall him ever getting in trouble for these, but maybe, I don't know, he might have gotten a cease and desist at some point. Back to the story, we see that Misery and Warblade are still engaged in their battle, and that Misery is actually more than a match for Warblade, as she seems to be very capable of both dodging his attacks and inflicting her own. However, she does not see that Maul is right behind her when he unleashes an uppercut that launches her through the ceiling. He then grabs Warblade and asks what's going on, as it seems as though the two of them knew each other and that they had a past with one another. At this point, Warblade kind of dismisses it and says it's personal, but Spartan states, no, it's not personal, it's time to leave, as he allows Warblade to join up with the rest of them so they can evacuate the facility before it explodes. As they reach the rendezvous point, Void comes into view and starts to teleport the rest of them out as Grifter and Spartan lay down suppressing fire, trying to keep all the androids at bay. However, before they're gone, Misery once again taunts Warblade, stating that, you know, you're going to run away again just like you did before. Bearclaw always had the right idea about who you really were. Bearclaw, of course, being a reference to none other than Ripclaw. And this infuriates Warblade as he immediately lunges towards her, jumping out of the teleportation field, which is not the best move given that the whole facility is about to explode and he's going to be stuck behind when it does. We're then treated to our second 4-page super splash, which looks just as awesome as the first one, with Warblade and Misery engaging in a battle to the death, as both Spartan and Maul look on, trying to decide what they should do, as if they leave the teleportation field, they're going to be stuck in the facility alongside Warblade, which is going to explode. But if they teleport away to safety, it means leaving their comrade behind. Now, I'm going to have to zoom back in again. We see over here that the battle continues as Misery doesn't really seem all that concerned about trying to escape and continues her assault on Warblade, taunting him all the while, stating that, you know, she should have taken care of him before and not allowed him to leave Cyberdata, and that he's proving once again why he couldn't make the cut and couldn't hack it in Cyberdata, and that she should have never been involved with him in the first place. The rest of the team is then teleported away to the MIRV outside of the facility, and the MIRV is then immediately flown to a safe distance to try and avoid the explosion. Spartan asks Zealot what she sees when she looks out the window, and she states that everything still looks normal and that perhaps Void has enough time. However, she's unable to finish the sentence when the facility and the mountain upon which it is perched all explode in a colossal blast that the team looks upon with horror as they realize no one could have survived that and that their friend is most likely gone, as Grifter states, Jacob's not going to like this, as we reach the end of the issue. On the reverse inside cover, we get the Call of the Wild letter section where readers could write in and heap praise or ask questions. And honestly, there's nothing too interesting about this one. Most of it's just people talking about how cool they thought the Wildcats miniseries was and how awesome they think the characters are, and that they were a little disappointed that there was such a big break between the end of the miniseries and the beginning of the ongoing series, but that all in all, they were happy that there was going to be an ongoing series and that they couldn't wait to see what Jim had in store going forward with all these characters. And that was Wildcats number 5. Now, to start things off with, all of the fold-out super splashes in this book are awesome. I love them. I mean, I understand that it's a little bit of a gimmicky thing, and it is kind of an inconvenience to read it and really kind of a pain in the ass to film it. But that being said, they look fantastic, and I actually really enjoyed that Jim Lee took the time to work out all of the little idiosyncrasies that would need to be worked out to create a book that you did this with. I think it's a fantastic, like, little just cherry on top of what I believe is actually the strongest Wildcats book that we've seen thus far. You may recall, if you watched my videos prior on the Wildcats miniseries, that I didn't find the Wildcats miniseries to be all that good. The story is kind of a mess. It's difficult to follow. They try to introduce characters over and over with no real backstory as to why they necessarily matter, and you kind of feel like you don't know exactly what's going on most of the time. And this book doesn't seem to suffer from any of that. You've got a very clear-cut objective that the team is trying to take care of this facility and get the data that they need that's within this facility. Then you also get a subplot that is starting the plot for the Killer Instinct crossover event that features both Warblade and Ripclaw. And all of it really seems to work basically seamlessly. It's easy to follow. Everything makes sense. It's almost like it's written by a completely different person, or perhaps Jim Lee just took the time to actually plan everything out and write it in a very sensical way. But then again, these are all just my opinions. You may not like the fold-out super splash stuff that was going on inside of the book and felt like that it was just kind of a hokey thing. You may also think that the story in this book wasn't that good, but if that's the case, it's okay because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.